Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Hi.
Hi.
So we need some help from our listeners.
Okay.
Our cocktail has no name.
No.
Yes, it's true.
I don't believe it. All right, so what's in this? What's in this thing? What are we asking them to do here?
Okay,
what's the goal?
So the cocktail is gin-based.
Okay.
For this, we used vermilion, which is a pretty purplish, bluish colored gin.
Okay.
And it's a very full-bodied gin, so there's that.
Okay.
And then we used Lillet Rosé.
All right.
Which is, it's kind of like a vermouth in that it's derived from wine.
Right.
Lillet also has a Blanc and a Rouge.
Yes.
But the Rosé, this is new for us. We haven't tried this before. And then it has a little sweetened lemon and a little real lemon.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And the proportions are similar to like a martini would be, but it's a little hard to describe. It's kind of light. It's kind of citrusy.
I'm going to try it.
Let's try it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the flavor... I mean, it's got the lemon, it's got the citrus, but it's really interesting what happens to it. I don't know what we should call it.
I don't know what to call it, listeners.
Gorgeous color-wise.
It's a really pretty color.
And it's definitely going to get drunk. That's not a problem.
It is. So yeah, for our listeners, it's sort of a ruby red color. It doesn't actually look like it tastes.
You're right, it doesn't. It's kind of sweet. It's on the sweet side.
It is on the sweet side.
But it's not like gross sweet.
Listeners, if you have any ideas for us on what to name our cocktail, we would love to hear. And if you'd like to know the recipe so that you can make it yourself and try it and then name it, just shoot us a note.
Love that
idea. You can find
idea.
us at cocktailtheology.com, like you always can. That's where we are.
I love it.
Today we are taking our cues from listener Luann, who had a suggestion for us for a topic for today. She has family members and friends who are of the Christian nationalist ideology.
Okay.
Specifically, on the far end of that is, people who believe conspiracies that are outlandish.
Oh, okay.
And some of them, originate with QAnon. And that QAnon is sort of, I don't really know exactly what QAnon is.
Right.
I know kind of what the results of QAnon have been, but I don't really know. I'm not in the know about that. But she really wants to have discourse with them about like what Jesus would say or what Jesus would do in response to QAnon, but she doesn't really know how to do that. Yikes. She's kind of fed up with having to sit quietly and listen as these people kind of prattle on with these crazy theories about all kinds of things here in the U.S. And so she asked us to maybe talk about that. What is a good Christian response to QAnon? How would Jesus respond to Christian nationalists? That's kind of our jumping off place.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All the things. Just all the things. I probably shouldn't be flippant, right?
Well.
Okay. Because in my view, if you are, and we've talked about this before, I have very little patience for one-way dialogue.
Right.
And it is my experience that people on any end of the political, religious, etc. spectrum who are completely secure in their views, and their views are anti-other people, are unswayable. Mm-hmm. So there's a big part of me, and this is scriptural, that suggests that one dusts off one's feet,
right,
and move to a different town.
And you move along,
You move along. So I admit there's that. And that's actually something Jesus said.
That is actually something
So that's how
Jesus said.
Would respond. Mm-hmm. Okay. Setting that aside for a minute. I think I want to lift out a couple of different things you said, and we can talk about any of them. But there's Christian nationalism, which is its own thing.
Yes.
Right? And there's, call it a subset that is Christian, I don't even know what you'd call it, but apocalyptic nationalism, if you will.
Right.
Right? They're trying to bring on the end times.
Yes.
Then you've got the people who call themselves Christians and believe what are really patently unchristian I mean, like non-Christian conspiracy theories. QAnon is not a religious position.
No,
right?
No, it's not.
It's something else. And then you've got the question about how do you engage people you love?
Right.
Those are three different questions, right?
Yes.
What do you think is the foundational question for our listener, Luann?
I think the last question you just posed is probably the one that is hitting her the hardest. These are people that she cares about. And I think the reason she wants to have conversation with them is because she cares about them, right? And so I think that, Luann, I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I believe that's probably where she's coming from.
Okay. So then the question is, how do I engage in a loving Jesus-like way with someone who appears to have gone off the rails?
Sure.
I would suggest that you cast out the demons. I don't care what the conspiracy theory is.
Right.
When you've gone so far into believing that people are so much more well organized than the rest of us,
right,
then there's a different problem going on. It is a problem between that person and the world, and possibly also that person and reality. But I'm not going to say that per se, right? I mean, I hate to say this, and I know I'm sounding flippant, but I don't mean it that way. How do you talk to crazy people? Because at some point, and again, it doesn't matter what the topic is, at some point, people lose sense of anything outside of their own world.
Right.
They believe that everything that is going on in their heads and the information that's coming through to them is the only reality, and everything else is false, fake, gaslighting, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
When you are talking to people who cannot believe that other people live in a reality different from theirs, like live fully in a reality different from theirs, you're talking about a particular kind of psychosis. I'm not sure what to say to that.
Right.
And again, I feel the desire to speak into that, but I think you have to treat it that way.
Yeah.
Then it is, if I were talking to these family members and I were in a good place to do that, I would not be coming in for the purpose of convincing them of anything. I would be coming in for the purpose of showing them that I was a safe place to talk to.
Ah, yeah.
Right? Then it would be more like, I know you have, I don't even think I would say believe because people don't know what that means. I know that you are invested in theories that are unfamiliar to me about the way our world works and how politics works. I would love you to explain that to me.
Okay.
And then I wouldn't be looking to defeat the logic, because it's not about logic. It's about emotion.
Yeah.
You can't defeat emotion with logic. It never works.
Right.
I would be looking to ask questions. This is a Jesus-y thing. I'm not comparing myself to Jesus, but it is a Jesus-y thing.
It is.
It's also a Socratic thing. I would be looking to ask questions that might just gently shift the lens. Just gently shift the lens. And understand that it is not my goal to actually change anyone's mind, and it's not my goal to make my mind heard. To talk kind of St. Francis-y language, you know, the part of St. Francis's prayer is that we seek to understand rather than seek to be understood.
Right.
And I think if you're dealing with anybody whose reality has gotten extremely narrow, that's what you've got to do. You've got to go into it just wanting to understand and having sympathy for a worldview that is so narrow and so terrifying.
And as you're talking about this, you know, it occurs to me that this really applies in so many situations when, you know, when a parent has a child that's gone off the rails. Instead of trying to force when it's your kid, it's a little different because you're trying to keep them safe. But trying to force your point of view.
Right.
It's like people who evangelize, you know, by sort of beating people with the Bible.
Right. Because that works.
Yeah. If you're really concerned about the soul of another individual, that's not the way you go about it.
That's
You're not going to convince anybody of anything doing that. If anything, they're going to run screaming the other direction. So a lot of what you're saying, I think, applies in a number of different situations that we as people of faith find ourselves in sometimes. Specifically when we're talking about dramatically different views of what Jesus said, who Jesus was, what Jesus represents, which is part of what we're talking about here. With Christian nationalism, they have a dramatically different idea about who Jesus was or is, and it's going to be hard to convince them otherwise.
Right.
So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, because sometimes, when people start talking about what's been living in their head, particularly if they're not engaged in a community talking about this stuff.
Correct.
If this is stuff that's been living in their heads and now they're verbalizing it and they're talking about it and they're hearing themselves say these things, then sometimes that'll shake somebody a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it'll make people think, okay, do I really believe that? Or did that really happen like that? Or whatever.
Yes, and I think it doesn't have to be as extreme as what the example you just brought up. If you're talking to a friend, even. If I were talking to you, mm-hmm. and you were so completely wrapped up in whatever you were feeling and the fear that always is behind those feelings, mm-hmm. and the sense of being attacked, if you were so completely wrapped up in that all of the way you were thinking led back to a single point of damage or a mm-hmm. single point of blame, mm-hmm. then to me, the loving thing would be nonviolent, what we call nonviolent communication, which is that the way of exploring what somebody's saying to you by asking questions like, say more about that. Mm-hmm. I hear, tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds to me, or I hear you saying, and not interpreting, essentially reading back
really
the words.
Just saying back, right?
Did I get that right? Mm-hmm. Not more information, but did I hear you correctly? Because I want to make sure I am listening in the way you need to be listened to.
Right.
And that's that nonviolent communication thing. And whenever you're in conflict, real conflict with someone, and whether it's conflict between senses of reality or whether it's, whose parking space it is.
Right.
Part of it is that way of approaching it lovingly through nonviolent communication. Now, I want to say really clearly, it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Because people who aren't playing the nonviolent communication game don't care. But that's the approach that we're talking about here.
Well, and I think if this is someone that you care about, mm-hmm. then what you're doing is showing them the respect.
Yes.
And they realize that they're being shown respect.
Yes.
And they are more likely to respond respectfully, or at least not to escalate the conversation.
Yep.
If they feel like they're being heard,
sure,
you're listening, you're receiving what they're saying, whether you agree or not.
Right.
And I think that's a great common place to.
Well, exactly.
For any of us.
Exactly. We all want to be seen and heard and put into a place where we don't have to defend everything we're saying.
Right.
And if you think about the people who believe in any kind of extreme view of anything, it doesn't mm-hmm. matter what it is, they've gotten into the habit of having to defend themselves.
Right.
Well, then once you've thrown up the wall of defense, it's the talk's over. You're done. Mm-hmm. So the key is to go into any of these difficult conversations as a Jesus follower, to go into these conversations humbly and with the desire to understand.
Yeah.
Now, can we talk about Christian nationalism for a minute?
Of course.
Okay. So I have to tell you that as I've been sitting here thinking about Christian nationalism, I have come to believe that Christian nationalism is the only kind of Christianity there is. And would you like to know why?
Yes, please.
Because before the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire, mm-hmm. and Christianity was absorbed into empire, Christianity wasn't a thing.
Right.
From very early on in our history, we have been ignoring Jesus and finding ways to make the structures around his words and teachings powerful in taking over conversations, countries, whatever.
Sure, using Jesus as a justification to say or do all kinds of really horrible things. Right.
And if you listen to Christian nationalists, they don't talk about Jesus.
No.
Because Jesus is a wuss.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's why there are all of these these drawings of Jesus, like, you know, wearing
Rambo Jesus.
Yes, Rambo Jesus. Right?
Yeah.
Because how do you follow a wuss when you think that you have a right to be in charge of everything?
Yeah.
I kind of wonder, and this kind of goes back to the should we call ourselves Christian problem, right? I kind of wonder whether Christian nationalism isn't just sort of Christendom.
Yes.
Rather than Christianity.
Right. I remember when you sort of introduced me to the distinction between Christianity and Christendom. You're right.
Yeah. Around the globe, because people have a desire to expand our kingdoms, we tend to lean into Christendom until we get to the point where some other dumb, if you will, is our guiding principle.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so really they're just kind of using Jesus as some sort of a badge or a, hall pass.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus makes a really good picture out in front, right? But only if he's got the Rambo things going on, right? Because Jesus, the man who actually lays down his life humbly, Jesus, the one who says, I do not condemn, Jesus, the one who says all of these other things, that's not useful to nationalism.
No.
Because this is a guy who said, no, I'm not going to be king. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate the honor. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be your king. That's not my job here.
Right. Exactly.
So I'm not sure I'm being helpful at all to our listener.
I think the listening and asking the questions and fully hearing the person out is a great place to start. I think the other thing that you can do, obviously there are lots of things you can do. You can not put yourself through that more than you have to. Mm-hmm. But when it's, Thanksgiving dinner and Aunt Bea decides that she has to talk about this, there are polite ways to say, or to change the subject or whatever, but there are polite ways to say, can we talk about something else? How about we talk about what we're thankful for today, instead of everything that you hate about everybody that isn't you.
Yeah.
Luann is a very gentle person. Mm-hmm. And so
most of our listeners are, actually.
And most of our listeners are. And so it's hard for us to stand up and be that person to say, yeah, let's talk about something else. Let's change the subject, or let's, this is a divisive subject, and that some of us don't agree, so let's maybe move on. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you get to that point.
Of course.
And of course there have been plenty of schisms in families over this very thing.
Yep.
You hate to see that happen, but when there's intolerance in these ideas,
yes,
that does extend to members of your own family if they don't see things the way you do.
Okay, so suppose our guidance is something like this. If you are trying to engage in a loving way with someone whose reality is closed, and closed in a different way than yours tends to closeness.
Yeah.
Okay. The approach is one of curiosity, compassion, questioning, not poking, but questioning, and looking to understand. Not just the words the person says, but the driving forces behind those words. What are they afraid of?
Right.
What matters to them? Where do they see their understanding of the world falling apart? Then the second step is to manage that as best you can. And if you're not actually able to have a conversation that is at all civil, or you are triggered by something abusive or whatever in your own past, then you extricate yourself.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be awful to do that. You just have to say, okay, I think I'm done with this conversation for now. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing with me.
Yeah.
Boom, done.
And done. Right.
Right. But if you ever think that Christian nationalism is not what Christianity is about, I hate to be, a little on the crazy side myself about this, but I think you're wrong. I think nationalism has been what Christianity, what Christendom has been about forever. So how do we follow Jesus in a context of Christendom?
That's a big question. for another episode. Listeners, we love hearing from you. Cocktail Theology is where you can reach us. .com, that is. Please do reach out with questions, comments. We do hope that the things that we share here are useful and helpful for you. If you find what we do entertaining or informative, we do hope that you'll share us and that you'll hit subscribe wherever you happen to be listening to us right now.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.